Hello there, everyone. It's your boy Hunt back with another kicking episode of Tabletop Recap. I wanted to do something today that wasn't D&D, just kind of break up D&D stuff, because 3 episodes ago it was D&D, and I think like all D&D before that. And then we had a non-D&D, D&D, and now another non-D&D, just trying to keep it separated. And as many of you know, for a long time we've been trying to get a Call of Cthulhu game together. I was promised when Descent into Avernus was over, I could run my rural horror Call of Cthulhu campaign that I have written the first half of. I can't write the rest until the mid-season finale, as I like to call it, is completed by the players, because there's a lot of choices and a lot of allies that could be lost, a lot of allies that could be gained, etc., etc. But today, we're talking about a one-shot that I ran for Big Boy Chungus and G. We were gonna record a podcast about it the day we played, but then we filled our tummies with Freddy's custard and burgers, and we also we're watching JoJo, and it was late. We're trying to catch up on JoJo, and we were just so tired. And at some point, I think one of us was just like, do you guys even feel like doing the podcast? Because I am tired. And everyone was in agreement. We just didn't have the energy. We were tired, and we wanted to watch JoJo. And then all this stuff keeps happening. So pretty much every time I'm with Big Boy Chungus, or I have time to record with Big Boy Chungus, we're recording an episode for Dungeons and Dragons. And those have been longer recently, because we've been having longer sessions, which is a good thing, because it means we can get more done, and it means the podcast episodes are longer, you get more content, we get more playtime. It's great. That being said, after we've recorded like one episode, because we record the D&D ones, as soon as we record one episode, it's kind of late. We'll often play from like 12 to 6:30. And then hour and a half episode of the podcast, we're tired, And it's usually on Sunday, and Big Boy Chungus always works on Mondays. I don't always work on Monday, but I usually work on Mondays because I usually get Sundays off, since I work Saturdays. So, at least we finally had the time to run this one-shot. So this was originally kind of a learn-to-play one-shot for what was going to be the Rural Horror Call of Cthulhu group. It's called The Gourmet. It's a one-shot. If you follow us on Patreon, which you should, because there's a lot of content there for Tabletop Recap, whenever I write a campaign or a one-shot or anything, I make a video about it. I make like a video of my DM notes and talk about how to play it. I was going to also release a written version on Patreon, but I figured, do I really need to do that if I have the video version? I was like, it just seems like twice the work to release the same thing, So I decided not to do that. But I did release a bunch of Call of Cthulhu homebrew cryptids and mythology monsters on Patreon in the $10 tier. But the videos are all in the $5 tier, and then the $1 tier is like pictures only. But the highest tier is $10, and you get everything. Lots of podcasters have much higher tiers than that, and our highest one's 10. Just wanted to plug that real quick. But yeah, so this game is kind of a clusterfuck, because it has been a long time since Big Boy Chungus and I have played the game, and G had never played. And I had a string of very long work days. My work days are usually 7 to 8 hours, which is pretty normal, but my commute round trip is like 3 hours. So I didn't really have a lot of time to, relearn these rules. And then neither did Big Boy Chungus, because he has a lot going on these days. And then I sent them to G, but he also has a lot going on. So I don't think G even learned to play at all, which is kind of funny. So the rules were kind of up in the air. We were fucked. It was so fucked. We couldn't remember stuff, but we got through it, and it was still really fun. I think the hardest part of Call of Cthulhu is trying to make the party take the game seriously. In Dungeons and Dragons, we're always joking around and stuff, but in Call of Cthulhu, it's a horror game. So if you're joking around the whole time, there's no impact at all. So we're going to tell you about the characters here. I just kind of threw them some pre-mades from the Call of Cthulhu starter set. I think I've reviewed the starter set on this podcast. But one of them was like kind of an uppity languages professor, and the other was an archaeology professor called Nevada Jones, clearly supposed to be Indiana Jones. So G played as Nevada Jones, and then Big Boy Chungus played as the other guy, and then I ran an NPC. I know what Dungeons and Dragons people think about DM NPCs, but they're almost kind of necessary in Call of Cthulhu a lot of times because characters are so fragile. They can die incredibly easily, often from one hit, or they can go insane and be out of the game. So having an NPC around is good because if someone's player character dies, you can toss them the NPC. Just have a character sheet for the NPC. You can hand them that, and that did come in handy and has come in handy. So my NPC was an accountant for a college, and it turns out they were all from the same college. So here we go. The players all woke up on an old ship. It appears to be perpetually twilight. The sky's full of clouds. No stars can be seen, and all around them is kind of a gray seawater, as far as the eye can see. No one knows how they got there. The two player characters recognize each other because they're both professors, but they had to figure out who the accountant was, because he does... he, works for the same place they do, Miskatonic University of Jorts. Sorry, of course. I stole that joke from Jeffrey the Dumbass. And they were all like, okay, why would three of us from this school be abducted and put on this ship? This really old-looking ship, which they realized was old because their archaeologist was very clearly able to pinpoint that. Old architecture, old wood, but in pretty good shape. And they were all kind of suspicious of each other for a bit, but they kind of got over that. They investigated the levels below the ship. They found places where people would sleep, but they were all very uncomfortable, and it didn't seem like anyone was staying on board. They found tons of barrels of fresh, clean water. They eventually found a fishing rod, one that looked handmade. Specifically, it was like a collapsible handmade fishing rod. No bait or anything. And they also found 10 loose matches eventually. And there was a lifeboat on the side of the ship that they perceived. They got up in the crow's nest, couldn't see anything. And while they were, investigating the captain's quarters, and which is where they found the matches, but there were no maps or anything. They heard kind of a scratching sound, like something was scratching the side of the boat outside, or maybe even in the wall or something. So that kind of made them bolt out, look over the side of the ship. They couldn't find anything. And before I continue, I do feel the need to say, we played this a while ago, weeks, maybe even a couple months ago, and just didn't find the time to do this. I should have done it sooner, just on my own, but I really thought we'd find the time to be able to do it with me and Big Boy Chungus at least. Big Boy Chungus and I, and whatnot. So they come up, and they hear a voice. Only one person can hear it at a time, whispering to them to come to the side of the ship. It's like, hey, over here. Come over here. And of course the player characters won't do it, so I have to have the DM NPC do it. at some point, or DMPC, I guess. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. And eventually they see him eating, and the food looks incredible. But he has a cut on his hand, and they're like, "What happened to your hand?" He was like, "Oh, I cut it on the side of the ship on some wood. But, someone beckoned to me, and then they gave me this." And they ask, who it was, what they look like. And the NPC is kind of like he's kind of having an existential crisis. He's not rolling the best on sanity. So he kind of thinks he's already dead and that a lot of this just doesn't matter or isn't real. And so, our player characters, they get called over, and at one point, I think food is given to them for free. And it is, and they try it, and it's like the best food they've ever tasted. It looks as good as it tastes. It is top tier, 5-star dining, and always the perfect temperature. So, they keep trying to talk to this critter that's handing them the stuff, and all they can see are its like fuzzy black hands reaching up and setting things on the edge of the ship where they can grab them, like on the railing. But the thing is, when I say fuzzy, I don't mean hairy. I mean like TV static. Like, it's that kind of fuzzy. Like a blur, almost imperceptible, even when still. If that makes sense. I described it better in the game, I promise. It looks like black static, almost. The hands do. And they're like, "Hey, if you want more food, I'm going to need payment." And they're like, "Well, what do you want for payment?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I could take a wallet. Go get that guy's wallet." And the creature wants them to steal the wallet, but, it doesn't, they don't do it. He just kind of asks for the wallet. And I think it's the NPC's wallet, or maybe it was G's character's wallet. And I really like how G is playing his character in this, by the way. Because the player sheet's obviously Indiana Jones, and he was like, "I could play this as Indiana Jones, but I won't. Instead, I'll play it as like an insecure coward who wants to be seen as this big pulp adventurer, but is actually like much more at home just looking at old vases in a lab or something, and not so much the whip cracking adventurer that the sheet kind of makes them out to be, And so eventually this thing says, "Hey, I can't feed 3 people. So one of you's got to go. Kill one of your shipmates, and I can feed the rest of you, because I can't support 3 people." So there's kind of this debate, and G's cowardly character kind of goes nuts. It kind of goes a bit nutso. And he pulls his gun, which he has because he's an Indiana Jonesy character, and he's like, "None of y'all's gonna kill me, and I'm gonna survive. So I'm gonna kill somebody." And there is a fight. Not the way this fight was supposed to go. Like, the different things I had written down were like, oh, maybe they can kill the NPC and that'll do it. Or maybe they say that the creature wants to kill them, and then I'll have the NPC be like, "No creature's going to kill me," and throw themselves overboard and drown themselves. By the way, before you have suicide in a game, make sure it's a topic that everyone is comfortable with in Session 0. And I did have a Call of Cthulhu thing. I believe my players said they were comfortable with, not comfortable with, but like they would be fine with a dead child, but not one killed in front of them, just like one that's part of a story. They would be fine with suicide, but they would not be fine with child suicide, and also no sex crimes. I think those were the lines we drew. So this was, have a session 0 about that stuff, especially if you're running a horror game where mental illness is literally a mechanic, But this isn't the way I expected it to go. One of the player characters, trying to kill one of the player characters, and then he was like, "Oh, you guys ganged up on me," and then we were like, "We didn't gang up on you. You tried to kill someone." It was pretty wild stuff. So I handed him the accountant's character sheet, and I was like, "Here you go. Here's your character now. You're the accountant. Congratulations." But yeah, it was pretty crazy. It was pretty crazy. So when this happens, an island is immediately seen in the distance. But, our player characters at the moment are kind of like, maybe this thing that's giving us food isn't as benevolent as we thought. Because at first they thought it was malevolent, then benevolent, and now malevolent again. So Big Boy Chungus was like, "Hey, I have my fishing rod. Maybe I can try to fish in the ocean." And I was like, "Okay, you can do that, but you will have to get in the lifeboat and lower it down." I actually think this happened before the fight. I'm sorry. Once again, this was like a month or so ago, at least. And he was like, "Oh, I have to go over the side of the ship in the lifeboat, even though I know there's some kind of creature out there? No thanks." And he was just going to use some of the food as bait. But yeah, now they see an island, so they both get in the lifeboat and row out there after the creature says, it can give them food on the island. Pretty whack. So they get to the island, and it's kind of like gray sand on the beach. The whole island seems to be kind of gray soil or so. And there's just lots of junk piled up on the island. Like, just kind of gray, colorless garbage, really? From, this is set in the 1920s. The setting of this doesn't matter if you want to run